Well, I'm happy to get started. Is that okay? Yeah, let's do it, okay? I'm Teresa Hunsaker, and I'm so used to saying with Utah State University Extension that it's going to take me a while not to say that. However, I do have what's called a emeritus status, so I can still say that I am with Utah State University Extension, although I'm not full-time employed any longer. I just retired, which feels really, really nice to have worked to that point. So you young people know that it does happen in the blink of an eye. You'll be standing somewhere as a retired person and thinking, where did the time go? My background is in food science, and yeah, hopefully, right? I see those fingers crossing. Hopefully today we'll be covering the science a little bit of freezing, and then talk to you about some things to make life easier in the process. My background, as I was saying, is in food science. And for me not to bring in food science into food preservation is really difficult. I want people to understand some of the background. So we're going to go through a few things today as far as freezing is concerned, as well as tools and equipment and things that you guys, that our employees here have questions come to you about. So be thinking of those. Do I need to click somewhere? You may be getting to do that. Is it not?
I should click.
Okay. Anyway, we'll get it figured out. The first thing, can you guys all see from that angle as well? When we're talking about any form of food preservation, and I don't care whether it's freezing or dehydrating or canning, whatever, freeze drying even for that matter, I want you to think about the advantages for you. What are some of the advantages for going with freezing as opposed to canning, as opposed to even freeze drying? For me, freezing is one of the easiest forms of food preservation. And it's a great way because most of us have freezers. Now, it may be full of other things, and we may only have the freezer above or below our refrigerator, so space is going to be limited. But it's an easy process. There isn't a lot of equipment other than, a few simple things to make life a little bit nicer when we're actually getting ready to prepare food. So to me, there's a ton of advantages for freezing. Color, flavor, nutrition, all of those things that are listed up there are certainly part of it. I am not seeing the cursor, so there. Yeah, will you just click for me, Chris? That would be just great. Okay. But the downside is how much freezer space do I have? And if I have a garden that has tons of produce coming off, what am I going to do with all of that if I have limited freezer space? And another thing that you have to think about is that that freezer is running constantly, right? 24/7, obviously. And so the cost on an annual basis is something that you'd need to consider as well. But for me, overall, in terms of a few pennies that it might add, week to week and month to month, it's still one of the nicest. Some people don't like the texture of some foods, and some foods don't freeze well. They just simply don't. So we'll talk about those in just a minute. But let's go on to some of the steps and some of the things that we want to consider as far as freezing is concerned for a form of food preservation. First off, and this goes for any level of food preservation, quality in, quality out. So one of the things that I see happen in all of my classes and experience with food preservation is that people think they're gonna try and gather and glean every last piece of produce, whether it's the apricots even that have fallen off the tree, whether it's that zucchini that is the size of a boat, whether whatever it is, they're going to do something with it. They're going to save or salvage it. And sometimes some of that for food preservation, and in the case of freezing, it just doesn't work well, either because it's so mature, so old, so bruised from falling off of a tree or that kind of thing. So just remember quality in, quality out. And you know, freezing doesn't enhance bad quality going in. So we've got to think about that. Another thing to think about is the control of enzymes that age the food, that break down the food over time. What do I need to do on my end to control for some of those enzymes? So you need to think about that before you even, you know, get into freezing. We call it pre-treating. For vegetables, it's blanching or steaming. For fruits, it's using things like ascorbic acid. We'll talk more about it. Products like Fruit Fresh and Everfresh that are available here at Smith & Edwards. So all of those will help enhance color, maintain color, help maintain nutrition, and even in the case of some fruits and vegetables, depending on the pretreatment, will also help with the texture. For example, if you have ever had a frozen potato raw with no pre-cooking, no steaming or anything, you'll know. Nasty, not good, but if you will take the time to cook or pre-treat by steaming or blanching that potato, it will last and be beautiful for freezing a lot longer, okay, than if I were just doing a raw sliced potato. So another thing to keep in mind as you go into this is the fact that there are textural changes, and it does matter in terms of how fast and how cold you freeze. So the colder I can get my freezer, air and temperature are the two biggest destroyers of food in freezing, okay? We'll talk about packaging in just a second, how important it is to get as much air out. It's cool that you guys carry here at Smith & Edwards things to help with the control of air, because that's a big deal. But temperature is really important. So if I have a freezer that is very difficult to hold or maintain a temperature of 0 or sub-zero, -0, that's going to be harder on the food over the long haul. So I need to know that going in, because some food will maintain and hold better longer than others. And I'll give you a chart on that. And man, packaging is important. So right before you start, pick the right packaging. Don't use old cottage cheese containers. Get good freezer bags, freezer containers, things that will help pull the air out. The plastic that they use in this is a nice heavy duty plastic. And so those kinds of things will make a difference. So get all of your tools and equipment together for optimum quality over the long haul of freezing. And then freeze quickly. Get things cooled down in small quantities as fast as you can, because the slower the freeze, the more destructive it is to the texture, the color, the flavor, the nutrition, all of that, okay? How many of you have gone to the freezer having packaged something, and I say something because now you don't recognize what it is, right? It's like, is that chili? Is that tomatoes? What is that once it's all frozen? I did that just a couple of weeks ago. Literally, the label had come off in all of the moving things in and out of the freezer, and I didn't find the label, but I was thinking, I think that's raw ground beef. So I bought it, and it was chili. And I was like, well, there went meatloaf for Sunday dinner because we had chili instead, right? I didn't, once it was thawed, then I went, oh, no, I can see what it is. So labeled. And again, that's part of packaging. And then keeping the temperatures as stable as possible. In other words, lots of fluctuation from 12 degrees, even though it's still frozen, to 0 degrees, up to 20 degrees, down to 4 degrees. All of that is tough on the texture, the nutrition, the color, the flavor as well. And then the length of storage. So all of that's important as well to keep in mind. All of that as you start planning everything. Okay. Let's talk about that quick freeze for just a second versus kind of a slow freeze. Now, I'm still talking very cold temperatures. Commercially, what they can do with my packaged peas and my packaged hash browns and all of those foods is much, much colder than I can achieve at home. So get out the idea in your mind that your funeral potatoes or your peas are going to turn out just like you buy them commercially, because you can't do that. But I can get the temperatures as cold as possible to get that food frozen as quick as possible by putting it on trays. And Vicki has prepared some cherries that we'll talk about in just a second. You don't need to get those right now. But the faster that I can even almost flash freeze, like individually put my raspberries out on a tray, or my apricots, and we'll do that in just a second. The faster that I can get smaller quantities frozen, the better. And then I can put them into, once frozen, freezer containers and packaging, and that will make a difference as well. So very, very important for you to understand that you can achieve what they can commercially, and keep your temperatures as cold as possible. Okay, moving on then, let's take a look at a couple of more tips and hints with the freezing.
There it is.
Here, you have this, because maybe that works better.
It might be closer.
Yeah, I can't. I'll give that back to you. All right, so let's talk about pretreatments for just a second. As I mentioned, it helps with color, flavor, texture, nutrition, all of those things. With veggies, it's going to be heat. With fruits, it's going to be the additives, such as the ascorbic acid, the fruit fresh. I keep using a commercial term, fruit fresh or everfresh. This is a fruit fresh preserve. This has ascorbic acid in it, and is actually less expensive even than ascorbic acid. You could use vitamin C tablets if you can get a really good buy on them that don't have the sugar coating, that are just the straight vitamin C tabs, not the chewables, all that kind of thing. But this has, this is great because it's got ascorbic acid in it. And ascorbic acid is the best preservative for color in fruits that we have. So that has some citric acid, ascorbic acid, it's got a blend in it. And it matters. It really does make a difference to do pretreatments, not just for, you've seen bananas turn brown, you know, those kinds of things. But my goodness, it's great for all kinds of fruit to stay pretty and nice longer. And another thing, as far as flavor, and a lot of people don't realize this, when the fruit starts to break down and oxidize or turn brown, in the case of fruits more particularly, but potatoes will do the same thing, it also changes the flavor. And a lot of people don't realize that. So again, it keeps us a sweeter, brighter flavor to it, not just the color. All right. Enzymes are present in all food. It's part of the aging process, so I've got to control for the enzymes. In the case of vegetables, I definitely want to pre-treat by either steaming in a steam blancher, in a colander that I can drop down into a pan of boiling water, or the steamer trays, which you have seen. So again, ascorbic acid, sugar packs for fruit, we'll talk about a number of those.
There's there.
I'm going to keep you hopping over there. All right, so let's talk about some of the ones for fruit. A teaspoon of ascorbic acid, and I can just crush some vitamin C tablets. We need about 3,000 milligrams, and if one vitamin C tablet has 500 milligrams, then I would need to crush about 6 tablets, right? So in a gallon of cool or cold water. That is plenty. Dissolve those up, and cool and cold is operative here. I don't want warm water, all right? So I dissolve those up. That's the number one top way to do this. Then I would follow the recommendations for the pack from a commercial source, such as the Fruit Fresh that we're talking about here, in the water that is required for that particular brand's Fruit Fresh or Everfresh or whatever their version is. Citric acid in water is okay, but it is not as effective as ascorbic acid or Fruit Fresh. All right, so just know that yes, it's an option. Do you guys carry citric? You guys have citric acid down there. Yeah, it's not as effective. So guys, when you get questions and somebody's saying, should I use this fruit fresh or should I use citric acid? Have them use the fruit fresh. The prices are going to be really similar. And I don't know if we've got, are both of these fruit fresh? Yeah. This is $4.99. I don't know what the citric acid is, but I think it's real similar in price. And so for the money, go with the one that's better, quite honestly. A lot of people don't realize that citric acid is not as effective. They think it's an equal substitute because, well, citric acid is in lemon juice or in pineapple juice, and it's still not as effective. And then there's lemon juice and or water, canned pineapple juice, and then even a sugar syrup. And there'll be some things that people like to do raspberries in the sugar syrup or blueberries in the sugar syrup. Many of us are trying to cut sugar down a little bit in our consumption. So I don't use too many sugar syrup packs on my fruit, but I'll tell you, it maintains color and the flavor. Obviously, how could you miss on sugar, right? But it does maintain the color and the flavor really well. And another option that sometimes you'll find even in like the ball candy book under the freezing section, they'll have you actually heat the fruit, just like you were heating the vegetables. I don't like it as well, but it is an option for some fruit. All right. Okay, so that's one method. As we talked about the ascorbic acid in terms of options for using it in mixed with sugar, or even put it in a sugar syrup, or just a straight ascorbic acid in water as a plunge or a rinse or a dip kind of thing. All of those are options for you. It's whatever you seem to want to do. So know that just because somebody sees one choice for the ascorbic acid use doesn't mean that they can't use it in a number of other things. I automatically put even ascorbic acid in my applesauce. I don't know if you've ever noticed in bottling, if you've ever noticed after a few months, not very long even, the top of your applesauce, you've noticed it, haven't you, turns dark. And then it eventually infiltrates down through the rest of the bottle. And so I found that if I even put ascorbic acid in, you don't pick up the flavor. In with my applesauce, I don't get that darkening at the top of my applesauce as quickly. I do a lot of apples.
Teresa, do you do that when you
Yeah, well, I do when I'm cooking the applesauce. I'll just put in a big kettle. I'll put in about half a teaspoon of just my straight ascorbic acid for fruit fresh. It works equally as well. All right. Okay, so moving on. Again, I can use ascorbic acid any number of ways. Just find your preferred method for maybe what the fruit is that you're doing. Don't forget to add that in. Okay, the primary method for destroying the enzymes in vegetables, as I mentioned, is the steaming. And another thing that I like about this is that there's also a little bit of a microbial kill in the steaming or the blanching process. So especially gardening and maybe, you know, some of the dirt and things like that I didn't wash off perhaps well, or dirty hands or things like that. I like that. There is a huge difference, as I've mentioned, between a cooked or blanched carrot, a potato, but there are some things that it doesn't matter. Like an onion. Why do I blanch or steam onions before freezing? The main thing would be so that my freezer doesn't smell like onions is bad, really, because it does kind of neutralize the onion, or my bell pepper. So it isn't a safety issue. In food safety, like a microbial problem or a pathogen problem, to not blanch. It's a quality. It's a long-term quality. So if you get customers in here and they're talking about, you know, seeing some of the guidelines in maybe the candy book about blanching their vegetable, do I really have to blanch my zucchini? The answer is no. It's not a safety issue. It's going to be quality. It's the difference between a cooked carrot frozen and a raw carrot. You're going to like the cooked or blanch first, better. It's going to turn out better, right? So it's important for people to understand that it's not safety that we're dealing with. We're killing this enzyme. It's an aging enzyme that helps keep the color brighter longer. But it's also, in the case of vegetables, a huge textural thing, not a safety thing. And again, there's more information at the National Center for Home Food Preservation if you want to go to the National Center's website. Okay, so I want to talk about this for just a second. Boiling water blanching and using a blancher. This is a picture of my blancher. It's like a big colander inside a bigger pot, like a saucepan or stew pot or something like that. Okay, so you can use any number of things, and you can actually, the neat thing about this is that I can plunge and hold till it boils for the length of time required for whatever vegetable I'm blanching. And then I can lift it out, drain it right over the pot, and then immediately plunge it into my ice water because I want to stop the cooking action. I want that immediate. So it's plunge it boiling, hold for 30 seconds if it's small peas, or a minute if it's small pieces of carrot, or whatever the time is that's the blanching requirement for whatever vegetable, okay? Then drain, 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 and plunge into my ice water, and then out, and then dry, or, you know, put it out on towels or something to get it nice and dry before packaging. It's simple. It is an extra step. And if you're doing 3 bushels of beans, seems like forever, right? But again, I do have to wait for that amount that I have in the pot to come back to a boil to start the timing. Okay. Steam blanching is where I'm only using the steam created from the boiling water. My vegetables are not going into the boiling water. But the time for this is half again as much as the boiling water blanch. So if it's 2 minutes for green beans, then it would be 3 minutes for green beans using a steamer. So my question is why? And we don't have any big, huge steamer trays. You guys carry the steamer trays just like the one we see here. You guys have both the plastic one and the metal ones down that's in the kitchen section. But it can only contain so much. I can only hold so many beets or so many carrots. Or it's frustrating when you've got produce coming off, right? So for me, in fact, if it takes longer and I can't get as much done as quickly, I'm done with the steam option. All right. Okay, so now let's talk about, we've got this food ready for packaging. Whatever method we're using, whether it's a fruit or whether it's a vegetable, please select your packaging well. As I mentioned already, containers that are intended for freezing are your best option for long-term storage and quality. They just are. The plastic holds up better. It will hold labels and stickers better. This is heavy duty, so it's not as air permeable and handles the freezing better longer by choosing some kind of good packaging. And again, you have options. There's no question about it. Obviously, there's a time and a place for the rigid containers like this, especially if I have a syrup pack or if I have maybe a certain quantity of mashed potatoes that I want, or my mashed sweet potatoes, or there's just a time and a place for having the rigid containers because it's easier to deal with this when I've got something kind of juicy or squishy or whatever. So each one has its place, but I do like my rigid containers, and I do purchase a good quality freezer container. All right. As we've already talked about, it's important to maintain as good a seal and as much control of moisture, oxygen, or air, as well as temperature. All of those play into this process. Also, I want to protect the food from, and I did mention this earlier, from off flavors. And especially if I'm putting something like onions in with peaches kind of at the same time, I want the smell to stay in the container of those onions, whatever. And then again, I want to be able to label whatever form, whether it's with freezer tape, whether it's with a marker right on the bag, whether it's whatever labeling option you choose. Please label. It really does make a difference. Okay, so packaging counts. All right, so this is where I wanted to just mention kind of this flash freeze. And I really like this for keeping my strawberries. I've got a beautiful strawberry patch. And for keeping my strawberries bright and whole and in nice shape, because I'm not going to use some in smoothies or in jam. I want to be able to have some of my produce in nice individual pieces that don't get squished and smashed, right? So what we're doing with these is, and again, so many things, just even for ease, I've got to mention, Vicki brought some apricots or something. Did you bring them to that line? Somebody, yeah, Vicki brought some apricots, but I wanted to show you how quick and simple. She's done some cherries here, but some things can be quick, like apricots. I did not get one apricot on my tree this year, not one. It froze, right? So with these apricots washed just quickly, I can pull these apart. I can stand at my sink and have quickly, see how quickly those are not quite, I can just simply seed and set those out on my trays and have this ready to go straight into the freezer. And then in an hour or less, get on arthritis. Vicki needs apricots are not as ripe as we thought.
They're not cutting down trees.
Still young though. But honestly, rinse and pop those in half and put them out on the trays and into the freezer, ready to go. And then I can put them into Ziploc bags or the seal meal kinds of bags where I can vacuum pack those. Now, we've got these individually frozen, so they stay whole, nicer, longer, right? So all we have to do then is to take a few of these, in the seal. What is this one? Is it the vacuum sealer? You want to make sure that this is pinched off and tight and well sealed as possible, so that you can use, I have one of these at home. But if you can feel this, and those of you who haven't actually held this plastic, you can see how heavy duty it is. It's so very nice. So then I just seal this down really well. And then I use the seal tool, vacuum, to pull the oxygen out. I don't know if you can see this, but there we go. Can you see how it suctioned that right in? Okay, done, right? So remember, moisture, air, all out will keep these longer, better. When do you want to serve these? Okay. All right, I love this. Now, again, I have kind of a mass production going on, and so one of the kids or my husband or somebody is, you know, doing one thing, I'm filling, they're pinching it off, and then somebody's sealing them off really quickly. So again, it made it look like it was more difficult than it actually is, but pretty nice. And again, these keep wonderfully, and grapes, cherries, even apricots, frozen. I can't even tell you, I've done so many fun things. Tangerines, even, icy cold, are wonderful. Just the little pieces of tangerine. So very, very easy to do. And I'm going to assume that you used your cherry picker for the cherries.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know how you do without these when you've got cherries. These are heaven. All right. So again, I love my dry packing and freezing for certain things. And again, I've done lots. I love it for my rhubarb to hold up nice, pretty pieces in my rhubarb pie and cobbler and things like that. All right. I can do a straight unsweetened dry pack. I can sweeten with sugar and some ascorbic acid, still as a dry pack. I'm not making a syrup, but the juices from the fruit will then be pulled from and make kind of a sauce. I just did some peaches last year and finished my last quart bag of those for a 4-H group of kids that I teach, and we were doing smoothies. So again, there's many options and many advantages to the different ones of packaging that you might have. I do like the fact that I can not add sugar in so many cases. The fruit is so sweet most of the time that there just really isn't a need. Okay. And again, my seal meal, how it suctions that in. I've already mentioned that you can do sugar packs and syrup packs. And again, there's some that are really nice for the sugar pack. For example, I have a daughter who is allergic to apples. And so we do a lot of pears at my house, and she loves frozen pears, sliced pears. But I do sweeten hers just a little bit and put them in a sugar syrup because they hold up nicer. The color, the flavor for long-term storage in the freezer is just nicer than like an apricot out on the tray. It just holds up nicer. Okay. Also, we get a lot of questions at the extension service, and you guys probably do too, about not using sugar at all and using sugar substitutes. In the case of freezing, go for it. Whether that's stevia, agave, whether that's monk fruit, whether that's, you know, there's so many different sugar substitutes. I will tell you though that there is a little bit different structural chemistry to the sugar substitutes. So they aren't as good for color retention. So if you're going to use a sugar substitute or have the public encouraged to put some fruit fresh in with that sugar substitute or some ascorbic acid. Okay. Sugar syrups, as we've already talked about, when you're using your containers, make sure that you fill those containers up to that rim that it gives you. It's about half to three-quarters of an inch. You want that full. The more head space, if you only have half a container, the more air, the more destructive, the longer, or the less time that it keeps is long. So fill those up. And some people like to actually crumple a little bit of wax paper in the top to even fill in that little bit of space so you don't get the freezer burn, that type of thing. That's an option. I've done it, and to me, it's not worth it. It's not worth the time. That to me. All right. You can pack in just unsweetened juice. I have white grapes or tops and seedless grapes, and I make just a straight grape juice, and it works wonderfully in peaches or my pears. It's just really, really yummy. They're not as strong a flavor, so that grape, like your Concord grapes, doesn't come across in the fruit. And so I've done a lot of just unsweetened fruit juice packing for some of my fruit as well. Now, I want to mention this one because a lot of people don't know that you can actually maintain color, texture, and flavor really well in a freezer pack. But the thing is the expense, right? And that's using this pectin syrup pack. And it is slick. I have done it, and I promise the texture of my fruit and the color maintains so very nicely in freezing. But again, it's one more extra thing that I have to do. And it's, what's the cost of pectin now, a box, right? And so I don't get a lot of juice or liquid, but boy, it really is a nice pack. But the recipe is there. You mix one package of your powdered pectin with a cup of water and you boil that for a minute. Then you take that off the heat and add an additional 1 3/4 cup water and stir that up really, really well. And then pour that over the fruit that you stacked into your rigid freezer containers. Slick, but again, an extra cost. Okay. We want to make sure we're getting all the air out. We want to make sure that we're sealing really well, making sure that we are labeling and, just doing everything quality so that it will maintain the quality and the flavor, color, and the texture of the food. And then again, remember to label. And one of the other things that I started doing in some of my containers that's just been helpful for meal preparation or recipe preparation is to put the quantity that I put in there. Another thing that I do is if I sweeten my fruit and I think I might be using it for jam or jelly later, I will say how much sugar I put in with that fruit so that I subtract that off the jelly recipe when I go to make it, because I don't need that in there. Okay, so again, labeling. All right, we're almost done. Now, I get a ton of questions, and you guys might too, and this is a factor in getting the food frozen and not having what we call flat sour, or it's not a harmful bacteria, but if food doesn't chill down fast enough, and I've stacked all these bags of ears of corn in one big block in my freezer, then I'm not getting this frozen fast enough and safely enough. So I want to avoid that by just thinking about the timing, which is easier said than done, I realize, in terms of how much I put into my freezer. So here's what you figure. You figure that you can freeze about right around 2 pounds of food per cubic foot of space that you will be filling. Now, that means that you've got other food in the freezer, right? So again, 2 pounds of food for every cubic foot of space that you're filling. And that will freeze that down in about a 24-hour time frame. And that's what you want. You want it frozen as soon as possible. Again, so that it is less detrimental. The larger the crystal is formed through slower, lower temps for freezing. And the larger crystal is more destructive than a small, quick frozen food. So again, don't overload your freezer. That's the bottom line. Do small batches as much as you can and get that food chilled at room temperature. Some people will even put it in an extra refrigerator to get it cooled down if they're eating. I just am thinking of corn on the cob. That's the big one. It takes up a ton of space. I think it takes forever to cool them down. And so again, it's going to take a long time to freeze if I've stacked them too deep. Okay. All right.
Teresa,
Yeah.
there's a question.
Sure.
When freezing meals in foil pans, what is the best way? Is wrapping the entire package in plastic a good idea, or just putting a foil on top of the pan good enough?
Yeah. So I will tell you my method of doing this, because I do a lot of freezer meals as well. Just did green chili chicken enchiladas yesterday. So I wrap, let's just say I'm doing a 9x13 pan of green chili chicken enchiladas or lasagna. I wrap my 9x13 pan with aluminum foil. Then I layer my enchiladas or my lasagna into my 9x13 pan. Okay, and then you can either bake it or not. That's up to you. But whatever way, it's cooled down, and now that's going into the freezer. And I wrap the aluminum foil over, and I keep it in the 9x13 pan, and I put it in for about 2 hours till it's solid enough to pull that form out, the aluminum foil form of lasagna or enchiladas out of the pan. Now I can wrap it a second time with plastic wrap, really a good plastic wrap, and then label it and put it in the freezer. Now I can stack, it's already partially pretty much frozen in 2 hours. Now I can stack those 3 pans of lasagna or whatever, just as a 9x13 frozen form. So then when I get ready to use it, I take the plastic wrap off, keep the aluminum foil on, put it back in the 9x13 pan, and heat it up for eating. I hope that answers the question. If not,
She'll
put it in the chat.
tell us back.
All right, and I do that a lot with other things. I will double wrap. And you know what is another great wrap for bowls, crock pot type things are those crock pot liner bags. They're great for soups or stews or chili. So I line my pan with that, and then I can freeze it in that form, and it's already wonderful. And then less mess. Okay. All right, so freeze food quickly, set the freezer temperature as low as yours will go. Some of them won't be in -10. I've got one that's it's considered a sub-zero freezer, and it's wonderful, and I can keep it at around the -10, -8. Spread your packaging out so you aren't real deep. Get as many, and then you can go back and stack. And then again, keep them as thin as possible. Around 2 to 4 inches on any packaging is all that I want it to be. And then keep it held as cold as I possibly can after it's frozen. Okay. All right. Now, this is what I wanted to mention. We've done research in terms of overall, again, safety is not the issue. It's still frozen, but it's going to be quality, right? So the colder the temperature, the longer the length of storage for overall color retention, nutrient retention. That's what this whole slide is pointing out. Yes, it's still frozen at 28 and 30 degrees, but it doesn't keep as long as nice, right? Okay. All right. So foods that freeze well, make your list. Start to know. And again, some of this is going to be your own satisfaction. You're not necessarily going to like the same things that I do. But generally speaking, sour cream, block cheese, because block cheese will just crumble when you go to grate it. Cooked eggs, meringues, custards, they weep, they separate, they go funky. Milk sauces and mayonnaise, those don't generally freeze well. But I have mayonnaise in a chicken divan casserole. Freezes just fine because it's mixed with even chicken soup and it's got other ingredients in it, right? Okay, so again, what freezes well and about how long does it start to, kind of break down, not keep as well. So start to make maybe some notes of things that freeze well and the length of time that you notice that they're still pretty good. All right. Some other things, biscuits, quick breads, yeast breads. One of the things that I found is that you and I get lazy when we get home from the grocery store. We take that loaf of bread, keep it in its plastic bag, and just put it in the freezer. You need to almost always, for overall quality, wrap it twice. Whether that's additional plastic wrap or whether that's take it out like your meat. How many times do you just put that tray of meat right into the freezer? You don't wrap it again. Take it off the styrofoam tray. Wrap it in plastic wrap and then wrap it in butcher wrap, butcher paper, freezer paper. You guys have freezer paper down here. I know it's wonderful. I go through it by the roll. But I promise you, your meat will last so much longer without freezer burn if you'll take it out of that packaging. That thin little coat of plastic that the butcher uses just does not keep the meat good for long periods of time as far as freezer burn protection. It just doesn't. Again, and then here's a whole list of other things that also freeze well. Things. The last thing that I wanted to mention, I think this is my last slide, is just we get a lot of questions. Why would I want to use my freezer for food storage and food preservation when there's power outages? And yes, almost all of us experienced a severe power outage just a couple of years ago. Ours was off in that huge windstorm for just over 7, 8 days. Thank goodness for generators. But the long and short of it is, don't not use, that's a double negative. Use your freezer for food storage and food preservation, because specifically overall length of time for power outages we can maintain for most short periods of time. Now that's different than your son, like mine, unplugging the freezer accidentally while he was getting a toy that had fallen behind the freezer. So he unplugged it, moved the freezer to get the toy, and then failed to plug the freezer back in. And I'm like, what is that dripping out of my freezer? And you find in the whole freezer. We have half a side of beef in that thing too. I have never been so sad about something in my whole life. But other than those kinds of things, most power outages are short enough time periods that using dry ice generators or just keeping the freezer door closed and not getting into it for those few hours or couple of days, it maintains it fine. That's my point. All right. That's it. All right, questions? Anything else? I want to mention just a couple of other things. You guys have mixes here for quick jams and jellies that can be frozen, and that's another really popular thing. There's a whole section in the Ball Cannon book on freezing and freezing recipes. They have an apple pie filling recipe for freezing in here that is wonderful. We use it in my master food preserving class, and they love it. It's so slick. There's also all kinds of tools to make your job easier for prepping food, whether it's the strawberry topper, whether it's the corn cutter off for the cover. Corn cutter. I have new names for things. I have new spellings too. And again, the cherry pitter and different tools, as well as the food saver that again, I believe in it so much for getting the air out. So again, any questions from anyone? Questions I told you to think about from customers that you have had? Things that have come your way. Doesn't even have to be about freezing, but anything food preservation, because that's my jam.
Talking about the citric acid not being quite as good as the other, is it acceptable?
It's acceptable.
Still,
It's acceptable. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even if they had some ascorbic acid tablets or vitamin C tablets and wanted to crush a few and mix with the ascorbic acid, that would be an option too. They just didn't have quite enough, mix it with the citric acid. But yeah, citric acid is acceptable. We do little tests in Master Food Preserver where we'll do some apples dipped with citric acid and dissolved in water and ascorbic acid, then we'll just leave them sitting there. And after 20 minutes or whatever, you can see the differences in them. So it's acceptable. Any others? Yes?
So I've had a customer ask me before, so they'll buy like canned fruit from the store and try to freeze that. And instead of using like the sweetened syrup, like they just still use juice from the can?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Juice from the can is perfectly fine. We don't have any commercial packed fruits. I think it's probably what you're, but fruits primarily that are water packed. Almost all of our commercial canned fruit will be in a light syrup or a heavy syrup. And that'll be labeled, but yeah, just use that syrup straight. Yeah, and we get that a lot. I just am thinking now, I'm cooking for just two. When the kids were home, that was different, and I would go through something, but to open up a big can of peaches or tomatoes, I don't use as much, right? And so how do I keep that longer? Well, I put it in the freezer, and yes, just keep it right in with the syrup that it's in for sauce or whatever. Yes.
I noticed on one of your slides that it's talking about, I think, the plastic containers, and one of the things it was saying that it might come out in a block. How would you just put that in the microwave and thaw it, or you just let it sit out on the counter and thaw it, or how would you thaw that?
Depends on what the food is. We're gonna want some things to be thawed in the refrigerator, like my chili or, whatever. Other things, if I'm gonna use it up immediately, I can put it in the microwave on a low percent power and get that thawed enough to crumble it up and use it. Did I see another? Yeah. Oh, there's where the other hand was.
People keep asking for pickling lime.
Pickling lime.
What's that so important for?
Pickling lime keeps the pickle or the cucumber crisp. And it's used in things like a sweet memory pickle, not in a fermented pickle. And upcoming classes, which both sites should have a list of, we're going to be talking about the use of pickling lime in our pickling class. And sometimes it's hard to find, but you guys here at Smith & Edwards have had this on hand for as long and forever as I have lived in Weber County. So thank goodness we can find it, because my grandmother's sweet memory pickles used pickling lime, and they're as crisp and sweet, wonderful. But that's the use of that, is for keeping pickles, a certain number of recipes, keeping that cucumber really crisp. Has to be used properly though, and that's one of the things we'll talk about. All right. Well, guys, yeah.
I just have one more.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just, we have used like the Ziploc, the freezer
Uh-huh.
bags, and also
Our
the
leaf.
sealer.
Uh-huh.
And that food sealer is amazing.
Yeah.
We have stuff from years back in the freezer we pull out. They just still sealed and as fresh as they were when we sealed them up. So
Before this, I used to take my freezer bags and take a seat. That's what Blaine was just saying, and try to take, pitch it off till you get to the corner, and then either with the straw or, just with your lips, try to suck as much of the air out, and then hurry and seal it down. Still, even doing that method, this will keep and stay so much better. It is so much less permeable to air than even the heavy duty freezer bags are. Yes, they're good. And I'm not getting a commission or anything here, but in terms of the quality, this keeps better longer. It just does. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Any other questions from West Jordan or South Jordan?
Not what I've seen.
Jordan, the other Smith & Edwards. All right. Well, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Some questions you can get. I didn't know I had.
Oh, yeah.